Hi, I'm Colin Wilson. I work with Anderson Valley Fire Department doing public education presentations. The video you're about to watch here was filmed on Fish Rock Road in the Anderson Valley during the course of two public meetings that we held here, and it covers evacuations, fire behavior, and sheltering in place. It contains some discussion of stay and defend, which is not the recommendation of the Anderson Valley Fire Department, but the vast majority of the people that attended these meetings all said they were planning to stay and defend, so we attempted to address some issues with that. We just wanted to be clear that even though we talk about that in the video, it's not the recommendation of either myself or the department. In the last 5 years, and you can probably guess why, when I do this "why are you here" thing, people say evacuation, evacuation, evacuation. And it's abundantly clear with the number of deaths that have occurred in Northern California why that focus has come to people, because it has happened in relatively large numbers for a number of years now. And it is quite likely that we will continue to see those type of fires, I think, in the future. So your concern is well founded, is what I'm trying to get to here. Okay, so any discussion of evacuations, there's always the CAL FIRE message that they send out these days is everybody evacuates all the time. How many of you plan to stay and fight if you have a fire around your house? Very typical. That's what I'm seeing now. So there's you folks who, regardless of what they're saying, you plan to stay. Now, you've got people that plan to evacuate, but the first thing they know about there being a fire around their house is they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and the porch is on fire, and the fire's there right at them. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is they get in the car and they start to leave, and Sandy starts to go down the hill here, and that whole hillside is on fire below her there, and she feels like she can't get out. So they're trapped. Those things all happen regularly, and they all kill people. Late evacuations is one of the principal things that happens that causes people to get killed in wildland fires, civilians to get killed in wildland fires these days. How do we avoid that? The first thing is you need a bit of a fundamental understanding of fire behavior. Why does fire burn like it does? When is it likely to burn more aggressively? And when are safer periods? We teach firefighters to do fire size up, and we used to talk about that. It was given in command classes, and I'd say, okay, you get to the fire, and what do you see? How's the fire in the structure? And so you're doing your size up. You do a walk around the building, you do your size up. Now we teach firefighters, you do size up every day. When you wake up in the morning is when your size up starts. And the first question that you want to ask yourself and be aware of is it December or is it September? If it's December, I can pretty well stop thinking about wildland fires and not be concerned about it. If it's late in September, there's been a run of 100-degree weathers. The humidity has been down in the low teens, and there has been significant wind events occurring. Poop, 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 poop. And my concern level has gone way up. There was discussion earlier about, do I stay or do I go? I can't, and no one can say, in this situation you go, in this situation you stay. What I can do is say, these situations are more dangerous to you, and you have to be evaluating your own property and your own evacuation circumstances to be making a decision about how quick you want to be hitting that trigger point that says, heck with this, we're getting out of here. And that evaluation and size up that you're doing is the beginning process of that, and all throughout the summer. It's not like you're going to go through a written checklist every morning. But now we'll go to the fire behavior. What causes fires to burn the way they do? There are three basic elements that control fire behavior. One is the weather, and there are several elements of weather that control it. One is the topography, slope of the ground. Got lots of examples of that out here. And the third one is vegetation. Now, all three of those can be critically important or, of no importance at all, depending on the situation that you're in. In the weather category, it's weather that develops, really big, fast-moving fires, and it's generally, these are wind-driven events. And we have been seeing, to my mind, increasingly high wind events late in the summer months, more than I recall seeing it in years past. I don't know if that's, true, but I believe that I'm seeing that. When you have a 30, 40, 50 mile an hour wind blowing and it's pushing a fire, that is a extremely dangerous situation, and it means that your trigger point, if there's a fire burning on that, maybe even the other side of 128, but a big established fire burning, the wind's coming from there to here, and you're blowing at 30 miles an hour steady with gusts running up to 50 or so. All of you that are saying you're going to stay and fight, that's probably a trigger point that you're going to want to rethink that. Under the right circumstances, almost, when you've got those high winds blowing, it can become, virtually impossible to live through it, no matter where you are, no matter what preparation you have done. So that's my first caution to you. My second caution is that none of you guys are spring chickens. And when fire approaches, when you're finding yourself having to defend your house and your life in a fire situation, it is extremely stressful. And the likelihood of heart attack or stroke or other disabling, issues coming up goes way up there. So that's another thing that you want to consider in your trigger points. What are my real abilities? And do not kid yourself about that. One of the things I used to teach when I was fire chief that I stole from Clint Eastwood was you have got to know your limitations, whatever they are. You need to know them and realistically think about that before you start considering staying and fighting a fire. So weather, wind, major component, temperature, humidity. Those three factors are the principal factors of weather that control fire. When temperature goes up and humidity goes down, fire ignites far easier. An ember lands in the grass when you have 70% humidity and temperature is 50 degrees, doesn't ignite, no problem. If it does start a little smoldering fire, it doesn't burn very well, it probably self-extinguishes. Ember lands in the grass when it's 105 degrees and has been for a good portion of the day, and the humidity is at 12, high probability that you are going to get ignition and things are going to burn much better. So that goes into those trigger points in your thinking about what is the danger and what is the current situations around here. Temperature goes up, humidity goes down, it's going to ignite easier and it's going to burn much better. And if it's got a wind on it, you're getting in some pretty dangerous country there. Okay, the other end of the scale, the third thing in that is fuel. And what you call houses and grass and lumber and firewood, we call fuel. Anything that burns is potentially fuel. And under the right conditions, almost anything will burn. In the fire behavior class that we do, one of the examples that we give of that is we take a block of steel and hold a piece of fire underneath it, and of course it doesn't burn, but you take that, then you take a piece of steel wool, you fluff it up to where it's out there fairly light, becomes much smaller dimensions, you hold a flame up to that and it does burn. You actually can get steel wool to burn. And the moral of the story there is that the smaller the element is, smaller in diameter, a piece of grass versus a tree trunk, The smaller it is, the easier it's going to ignite and the faster it's going to burn. So vegetation, we have all manner of it around here. Some places are fortunate enough that they are in, relatively surrounded by grass, where you can get out there with your weed eater or your weed burner or whatever, and you can mow or weed eat that grass down to where it's less than 2 inches tall. I take it and I scalp it. I scalp a fire break all the way around my house, so I got 4 or 5 feet of bare dirt. Fire can still cross that, ember can blow across it, but it's going to definitely slow it down and give me time, and under the right conditions, it's going to stop a fire. So those are light fuels. The grasses, and like I say, ignite easy, burn fast. Then you move up into the brushes and the smaller diameter fuels, maybe 10-inch fir tree, and on up until you get into, like, there's old growth redwood, residual old growth redwood around the ranch here that you see, and mature trees, and those we call heavy fuels. Harder to ignite. Once ignited, they tend to burn a little bit slower, but they burn a lot longer. Anything burning, it's a process. The process of combustion involves heating it to its ignition temperature, and then providing it with air so that it can continue to burn. And like I said earlier, virtually anything will burn under those right conditions. So we're talking fuel, the different types of fuel. Fuel in the burning process, there's a thing called the thermal curve, and it's the process of what a fuel goes through from the point of ignition and to the point of consumption. Just standard curve. As something ignites and starts to burn, before it ignites, it's at 0 on the thermal curve. It ignites, it starts to burn. As it burns, more and more of the fuel is ignited and burning. The byproduct of that combustion is heat, and that is measured in BTUs, and it gets higher and higher and higher. The release of BTUs gets higher and higher and higher. You come to a point where you hit the peak of the thermal curve, where the bulk of your material is probably ignited, it's free burning, and it has, it's got everything that it needs to burn. That takes it up to the peak of the thermal curve, and then at this point, it's starting to consume the fuel. So regardless of what else happens, it has less and less fuel, so it descends the thermal curve on the other side. The release of BTUs and the heat gets less and less and less until the fuel is completely consumed, and now you're back down to 0. Now that becomes important in fire behavior, and it becomes very important in your ability to survive in a fire. When a fire burns through, wildland fire, we talk about the flaming front, the advancing portion of the fire often being pushed by some kind of a wind. Now, so that flaming front is going to go through that thermal curve, and we're going to talk about that after we go over the last component of what affects how fires burn, and that's topography. The principal factor of topography is slope. If this is a kitchen match, and I strike it, it's got a little flame burning up here, and I hold it vertically, what do you think that kitchen match is going to do under, sort of normal circumstances? It's probably going to go out. Oh. And if it doesn't go out, it's going to burn very slowly as it burns down there. And that's going to depend on what's the temperature and what's the humidity and how big in diameter is the match. But it's very slowly burning down the match. If I take that same match and turn it this way to where it's horizontal, open field of brush and grass, without the wind pushing it, it's going to proceed relatively slowly across that level ground. If I turn it down to 45 degrees or vertical, that same lit match, what's going to happen now? It's going to burn my fingers very quickly. It's going to advance up there. So it's really simple. It's so simple it seems stupid to even mention it. But when you think about that fire advancing on a house like this, and let's imagine that this is an upslope going straight up to a ridge line, say 500 or 1,000 feet above us, and we do have a downslope coming in from this side. A fire advancing from this side is going to have the benefit of slope. Anytime a fire is burning uphill, part of what's happening is it is preheating the fuels that are in front of it, and it's in, just because of the nature that the flame wants to burn straight up and down, it's closer to that fuel, and it ignites and burns much more rapidly going uphill than it does on level ground or downhill. So in our trigger points, our evaluation process, and considering our evacuation points, we're thinking about those elements of fire behavior. The weather factor is a day-to-day issue. That's going to change every day, and that's why you start doing your evaluation every day when you wake up, particularly in the late summer, about what you're going to do. The topography is fixed. That is not going to change. You can make some judgments about that, both around your house. What is the more threatening side? What is the less threatening side? I've got a steep upslope coming at my house. There's been no vegetation clearance done around it ever. Well, I'm going to start on that steep upslope because that's where it's going to be the most dangerous. I'm going to work around the house, and eventually I'm going to work up to that downslope. A fire coming down at me here is going to be a much slower moving fire working its way down the hill. There's one thing with fires burning downhill that becomes an issue sometimes, and that's what's called roll down, burn back. Pine coke gets lit 300 feet, 500 feet up the hill, becomes ignited, the needles around it destabilize, and it rolls down the hill. So now you got a burning pine cone, rolls 200 feet down the hill, igniting the hill as it comes, and igniting the hill much lower down. Now you have burn back. That fire is now going to burn back up the hill much more aggressively. But still, the slope, uphill slope going away from your house or your evacuation route is less dangerous to you than an uphill slope. One of the most dangerous features of topography that affect wildland fire behavior is what we firefighters refer to as chimneys, and most civilian people refer to them as drainages. And when a drainage occurs on a side hill, the steeper the side hill, the more potentially dangerous it is, and the more pronounced that drainage is, it tends to focus fire as it moves up the drainage, preheat the fuels above it, and it creates an extraordinarily dangerous situation, one of the most dangerous features that has anything to do with topography. So if you have a chimney that's adjacent to, or worst case scenario, right below your house, you need to certainly take that into account. If you get a fire established in a chimney moving up at your house, it's a far more dangerous situation than just a fire on a side hill coming up towards you. So you want to take that into account when you're doing vegetation clearance, and you also want to take that into account when you're considering your evacuations. Speaking of evacuations, on your evacuation route, when you're evaluating your evacuation route, you want to be sure to take note of any of these chimneys that you have, particularly ones that are pronounced, along your evacuation route, and that if they're have heavy vegetation in them, they become more dangerous yet. They tend to focus the fire moving up that drainage, and they draw air in at the bottom, they exhaust it out at the top, and they can have explosive fire conditions as fire moves up a chimney. So you want to be sure in both your evacuation planning and actually while you are evacuating, that you do not allow yourself to become stuck or trapped in a chimney with a fire established below you and moving up the hill. Now if you think about Fish Rock Road here, after you go through the tree line and start down the other side, you get a mix there. You get several things. That's your evacuation route. You have the beginning of it where you're going through the valley, and you have grazed grass on both sides of a paved road. Under almost any conditions, you're going to be able to stop on that paved road with a fire approaching you through that grazed grass It's going to burn up to the edge of the road and stop because it runs out of fuel. There's going to be heat, smoke, and embers moving across the road, but probably not enough to be a real problem for you in your car with the windows rolled up. It's going to ignite the other side of the road and burn on. That flaming front, as it moves across that type of an area there, that event is going to take probably seconds and at most a few minutes for that to occur. So in that situation, in your evacuation planning, you don't have to survive for an hour in that situation. You just have to be able to survive for 4 or 5 minutes while the fire burns through. Once the fire burns through, in a grassy situation like that, it tends to burn pretty much all the fuel and it creates what we call black. For you as firefighters, evacuees, whatever you happen to be, black is your friend. Once you're in a burned out area of, particularly grass, because there's just, once it's burned, there's nothing left that's not going to reburn. You're safe at that point. So in your decision-making diagram, you don't leave that point until you know you're entirely confident that you can get to whatever your next safe point is going to be. Now, how do you know where that is? Because you evaluate it. You're going to start tonight when you go home, and every time you go to town, every time you go anywhere, you're going to start paying attention to slope, vegetation, and always remembering what the weather is going to do. And what you're going to find is, geez, I don't want to be here when a big fire comes through, and I could make it here. As a firefighter, when I was responding to fires, and particularly when I was going on campaign fires, whenever we'd go out to an assignment, I was constantly making that evaluation for myself and my engine company. Where can we survive? Where can we not survive? So in your evacuation routes, that's your homework from now on an ongoing basis, to be evaluating those routes that you might need to travel and deciding where you don't want to be, where you do want to be, and you want to roll into that a little bit of an element of time. Okay, if I make it to the tree line, I'm not seeing any smoke, I know it's going to take me about 5 minutes to get from that tree line down to 128. When I get down to 128, there's the intersection of Fish Rock and 128. Now that's only a T intersection, but it's still a wide expanse of pavement, rock shoulder, with no big downhill exposures rolling up to it to superheat it. So the intersection of 128 and Fish Rock Road is probably a pretty reliable safety point in most conditions. Like I say, there are no hard facts in this. You get 110-degree day, 6% humidity, and a 50-mile-an-hour wind blowing up the 128 corridor. Probably, all bets are off. Those are extreme conditions. I've never seen them in the 50 years that I've lived here. Doesn't mean that has never happened, but in most cases, any of these, paved road intersections for you are going to be potential refuge areas for you. And you want to be evaluating, okay, from that one. Now, when I get to 128, is the fire that way or is the fire that way? If the fire's that way, I don't go that way. I go this way. And it may mean that I'm going to go into Boonville and go over 253 to get to 101, where if south is where I eventually want to go. But I don't travel towards the fire. I travel away from the fire, having thought out my evacuation routes beforehand. And you do that, these routes that you're going to evacuate over are routes that you travel, likely, frequently, and you should be constantly making those evaluations of them and kind of rating them. Yeah. Which leads us to our discussion of sheltering in place, temporary refuge areas. Okay, temporary refuge areas, sheltering in place. You guys, some of you have said, most of you have said you plan to stay and fight, so you're thinking in terms of what we call sheltering in place. A companion to that is a temporary refuge area. Probably not quite as good as some place that you would plan to shelter in place, but some place that, well, I think I can probably get through the way this fire is burning on this day. I should be able to survive there. And those intersections that I talked about, those are temporary refuge areas that under some conditions, maybe most conditions for a lot of them, you're going to be able to ride out a fire inside your car, wait for the fire to burn off. And like I say, one of the mistakes that people make is they'll drive through an area that they could stay in and ride that fire out for days or weeks if they had to, and they'll keep going and get themselves into trouble. One of the things that happens while you're evacuating is there's a lot of smoke, can't quite see well, people are not at their best as far as how they're behaving. Boom, a little bit off the road, tire stuck in a ditch, can't go further. If you get to a safe area when you feel threatened and you're confident you're going to be able to ride it out there, you want to really consider just staying there. Say it again?
You said stay in your car and roll the windows up?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Don't get out of your car.
We teach firefighters a couple of different techniques for what we call a burnover. When a burnover is when the flaming front of the fire is burning right through the area that you're in, and you either can't leave it or choose not to leave it, and you've got significant fire behavior going on there while that happens. So we give them three options really. One is get in the engine, close the doors and windows, which they should be closed. The doors and windows should be closed all the time you're in an area of a wildland fire. Get an ember in the car, set the seats on fire, and now you don't have a car. But so one option is get in the engine and ride it out in the engine. Another option, we're often doing structure protection on these wildland fires. You've made your judgment that, yeah, I think we're going to be able to safely defend this place, but while you're defending it, and your plan is then, I'm going to stay here while the flaming front burns through, and I'm going to protect this house. And my engine comes with 500 gallons of water. I'm saving 100 gallons for myself if I need it in an evacuation situation. So I got 400 gallons to protect this house with. I come in, wow, well, wood siding. She's done pretty good clearance around here. Fire behavior's not that bad. Fire's coming from this direction, and I got good clearance in that direction. I think we can safely defend this place. So I decide to stay. As the fire comes, blows embers over behind me. I've got fire. The fire gets a lot worse than I thought it was going to get. And my evacuation route, tree goes down across it, or I just see enough fire on it that I don't want to try to drive through it. So the second option we give them, I'm not going to sit in the engine, I'm going to go in the house. You may already be in the house. You may wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, fire's everywhere around you, and the house is on fire. One option, not the best option, sometimes the last option, but an option that absolutely works in many, many cases is don't leave the house. Stay in the house. We talked about the thermal curve. Wildland fire is burning through. You're talking perhaps, as low as many seconds, perhaps as much as 5 or 10 minutes. The thermal curve is going to peak. Flaming front's going to burn through. The house catches on fire. But how long does it take to become untenable where you can't stay in the house? How many people have ever seen a house burn to the ground? How long does it take?
A long time.
Longer than you'd think.
Yeah.
Longer than you'd think. So you got a house, probably got at least 2 exits in it. So you want to make sure that as the house burns down, you're not being cut off from your exit, that you could get to it. And in this case, you would much prefer to be exiting this way than the other way. You stay in the house, you wait till you can't stand it anymore, and by the time the house has gotten to that point, there's an excellent probability that look what's around here. You got almost no fuel over here. That manzanita is going to get hot for a while. This manzanita is going to get hot for a while. But while that manzanita is burning, I can run out of the house and come over here, and I'm going to be able to tolerate that. So long story short, don't forget that the house is a potential refuge for you. Whether you're in it or outside trying to fight it, things get bad, consider that as a possibility.